All right, welcome to the Global Phys Ed Boxcast. I'm really excited today. We're going to be talking to Dr. Michael Hynes from the Pat Med School District in the New York City area. Dr. Hynes, how are you?
I am very well. How are you doing? And it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much. I know we've kind of been trying to. Well, I've been trying to connect with you for some time now because the first time I think I was moving to Saudi Arabia, where I am now, and we kind of missed each other there. And then the next time I tried, once we kind of got settled here in Saudi Arabia, the next time I tried, you were in Finland, which was really cool watching your social media feed from Finland and all the things that you kind of learned from there, which is something I definitely want to talk about in this podcast. So now we're here, and we're actually talking and finally meeting each other through this virtual means. But thank you so much for joining us. I always like to get a little bit of background on our guests, so could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into education?
Sure. Yeah, I'll make this relatively short. I grew up when I was a student loving elementary school. I really struggled in junior high school, and I hated high school, and I graduated at the bottom of my class. We start with that because the lens that I see things through, if I went back in a time machine 30 years ago, this is the last place I thought it is working in a school system, certainly being a superintendent of schools. So my background really is in psychology. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. That's why I have a beard. But once I stepped in my sister's classroom, who was a kindergarten teacher, and I read a book to her class, changed my life forever. And from that point forward became an elementary teacher, then an elementary principal, middle school principal, assistant superintendent for curriculum, and now my second stint as a superintendent, as you said before, in the Pat Med School District in New York. And I've been very fortunate in my 20 plus years in education, and I get to speak with people like you.
That's awesome. So why do you think that was that you disliked school when you said there was a transition period from elementary to secondary school, where I think there's a lot of kids who kind of feel that way, where they love school, they love going to school, they love learning, and then something happens. What do you think that was for you?
Yeah, for me, it was when they started to rank and sort kids, is when you start taking honors classes and other classes. So a lot of my friends went to honors classes, and I didn't test into honors classes at that time. And I remember being just devastated. And I started to really turn off and to act out and to think I was less than because I wasn't as smart as my peers, according to whatever assessments they were using. And that just really grew more and more as I went through high school. I call it purgatory. There are lots of kids who are in purgatory when this real love affair with education as a student in elementary, because much of it, at least back then, was play-based. It was all about discovering. It was all about trying to figure out what your potential and talents are, and not everything was had to have a metric attached to it. It was holistic learning, I think, at its best in the 70s and 80s when I was a student. But that all came to a halt again, and it still does now in American systems, where they start ranking and sorting kids. When they start thinking, we should have gifted and talented programs for kindergartners. All of these things just, to me, reek of sorting and starting to, figure out where kids are smart. And the way schools traditionally focus on is just academics. And we know that's not what gets us up in the morning. That is not the end all and be all of being in school or becoming educated.
So why do you think that shift happened? Because I know what you're saying, and I know, definitely coming from the United States school system, you can see that. And like you said, in kindergarten, you start taking these IQ tests to see who are the high flyers and who are sort of the regular kids, and that sorting happens really quickly. And the kids know that, and the parents put pressure on the kids to perform in those tests. Where do you think that shift happened, and do you think it has anything to do with the obsession of testing our kids and getting all that data from our kids now?
Yeah, I do. I mean, listen, if you look at where the American system was, in the early 80s, we know in 83, Nation of Risk came about, right? And that freaked America out, saying that our kids aren't as smart as they should be, and especially if we're going to compete globally. So from that report that came out in 83, it's just gotten worse from there. Because if you look at any of the federal edicts or mandates that really talked about public schools and what they need to focus on, that trickles down to the classroom. And eventually what's happened is education has been compressed to two things: how well you do in ELA and how well you do in math. And everything else falls by the wayside as far as a hierarchy is concerned. There's 1A and 1B, wherever you would put ELA and math in your own configuration. And what that has done over time is things have been removed out of the classroom. And play is certainly one of them, recess, the arts, the humanities, music. A lot of that has fallen by the wayside more for test prep to make sure that kids are doing well on those two particular tests. And the ultimate one, as we know, is the SAT, right? So it just focuses on English and math. And what happens is you have schools, you have teachers, you have classrooms that are identified as, that is their identity as far as how well kids fare in those areas. And it's been, I always talk about this analogy of the boiling frog, which I'm sure you're aware of, right? If you throw it in a pot of boiling water, it jumps right out. If you put it in lukewarm water, you go up 1 degree a minute, it boils to death and it has no idea. That's what's happened to us, I think, in the American school system since the early 80s, is that we have been boiled to death to of what we're doing is the only way and the right way to do things. And that's where I have a problem.
So not too long ago, we had Dr. Peter Gray on the show, and he's actually the one who told me, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy. He gets it, And it reminds me a lot of his work as far as how we got to this point where we've kind of safeguarded our children to a certain extent where it's actually detrimental to their well-being. And I think that happened gradually also. And I have 2 kids, and I'm guilty of it. Not before I knew the research that was out there, not letting them go too far from the home, right? And not really considering how I grew up, where we had this freedom. When the lights come back, when the street lights come on, you come home for dinner, that kind of thing. And I think, like you said, that this was a gradual effect. How much do you see as a superintendent in your viewpoint, in your perspective, how much of what happens in the home and that sort of coddling that happens in the home, how much of that affects the learning that happens in your school?
That's a great question. And I hold Peter in the highest regard, Peter Gray and Ken Robinson and Pazzi Salberg. Those mega thinkers as far as really distilling very complex information and very understandable. And his premise, as you just articulated, is that we have Bubblewrap Kids for a long period of time. And the byproduct of that, as I'm sure he said with you, is more anxious, depressed, and suicidal kids, this generation that we're serving, than any other generation before. And it has been a slow boil over time. And yeah, so that's how it manifests. What happens is we are serving kids who are really struggling risk takers. They're scared to take risks, to try things that are new and different. And parents, I think their hearts are in the right place. I think parents have been led to believe, for whatever reason, whether it's the news or anything else, that society, this is a very unsafe environment for kids to grow up outside. As you said, you always knew where your friends were because that's where all the bikes were, right? Outside of the house or at the park, wherever. You don't see that anymore. You don't see that. You don't see kids walking down the street anymore. You don't see kids at the park anymore by themselves. Everything is hyper organized. You always have an adult there. There's always, teams involved as opposed to pickup games. And what I have noticed over time is that you have kids who really short circuit throughout the day. They don't know how to ground themselves when things don't go their way, how to recalibrate. And that's why a lot of our initiatives in our school district really focus on those particular things, those lifelong skills that kids have lost, I believe, over a generation or two, which is really scary to see. And I'm guilty too as a parent. I have many kids, I have many children at home, and their ages range, from a teenager all the way to a 3-year-old.
Mhm.
I find myself at times falling into that trap. But I'm going to tell you right now, the biggest gift we can give during the school day is to allow them to do things that we did when they were our age. Let them go to the store by themselves. Let them stay outside until the street lights come on. Let them do things like cook dinner when they're 11 or 12 years old. Like we were allowed to turn on the stove
Right.
when we were young kids. We don't allow these things anymore. And these are the things we notice in schools because, again, it manifests with kids who short circuit very easily and don't know how to bring it back. And then we lose them. We either lose them for the day, we lose them for the week. And it's really disconcerting to me in many ways, not just me, but to the administrators and teachers who serve these beautiful kids.
Yeah, what's interesting is recently I read Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And
Yep.
one of the things that he talks about in that book is that kids are anti-fragile. And that notion of being anti-fragile basically means that you need those challenges, you need those setbacks in order to grow stronger. And it seems to me that we're taking those things away. And like you said, when kids don't have that sort of unsupervised free time, I see it. I teach kindergarten now, kindergarten physical education, but I see it where the kids look to the adults for the answers instead of trying to figure out how to figure out this conflict for themselves. How much of that do you see in your schools? And then I guess a follow-up to that is, what can we do as teachers to help that sort of anti-fragility in our kids?
Yeah, that's probably the $1 million question. I read that book. It reaffirms, I think, a lot of what we already knew. Certainly was able to back it with either research or really, really great vignettes that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
I guess I can answer it this way. We have noticed it here in my school district to the point where a lot of what we do, part of our core values, is to push back against that, to provide those opportunities for kids to fail over and over again, and to wash away the negative stigma of what it means to fail at something, to not do it right the first time. And because, again, we know as adults, that's how we grow, that's how we learn. We try things over and over again. So one of the things I want to talk to you about really quickly, and it's really been remarkable, is a play club that we have before school. And Peter Gray's been working on this play club with us, and we're now into our second full year of moving it forward. It's an hour every Friday where mixed kids, meaning their ages, kindergarten to 5th grade, have a run of the school, both inside and outside. The adults that we have there to supervise, really, the adults are told not to do anything.
Really?
Kids, they're actually, and it's so counterintuitive for them. So they're actually directed. It's like, do not, unless they're really, really hurt, do not engage with them. You let them do what they want to do. It's true free play.
So you're saying like arguments happening, kids fighting over a ball.
That's right.
Back and let them figure it out.
Step back and you let it go. And it's like a social experiment with an exponent of 10 on it, right? So, yeah. And we signed up for this. So like, I don't know if we can do this. Like they were thinking it was going to be complete chaos. And let me tell you something, after the first time we did it, if I took it away now, I would probably be fired from my job. Because what they have seen as far as not only 5th graders playing with kindergartners, because again, ranking and sorting, we believe 5th graders can't be with kindergartners, right? 4th graders should be playing with 1st graders. Here, as Peter really focuses on so much, is that mixed age play. Because when we were young, right, if we were in a neighborhood, we're playing, if I'm 12, I'm playing with 14-year-olds and I'm playing with 10-year-olds, right? In school, we make sure everyone plays with the same age. And so we provide this opportunity. I'm going to tell you what has happened is that new friendships are formed. Students are learning how to figure things out on their own. They're creating their own games. And what we thought maybe in each of our 7 schools, maybe 20 kids would come. It's 100 kids actually come in the morning, and we have a waiting list. And what happens is once they're done with that and then they go to class, they are ready to just rock and roll because they are so fired in. They are so grounded and so ready to learn that the teachers are like, I can tell you were in play club. I can tell you weren't in play club because that they're ready to learn. They're primed. So schools have to provide these opportunities for kids throughout the day. I mean, you know better than anybody. You know, at least in New York, the average recess time is about 12 to 15 minutes, right? That's the average, which to me is clinically insane. It's actually criminal. And speaking of criminals, federal prisoners, as you know, probably, right, they have at least an hour a day. But students only have 12 to 15 minutes a day. So we actually provide 80 minutes throughout the day where they can have lunch. Students have lunch and they have recess, and it's unstructured. So they get to do whatever they want. And that has been a significant impact too.
Now, what's interesting about that too is, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Debbie Ray from TCU. She does a project, the Link Project, where she actually went over to Finland and she got a lot of information from them as well. And she has several schools. I think it's about a dozen schools now in the Dallas area, and she's seen this tremendous, increase in attendance in their students. Test scores have gone up, behavior has improved, and it's just with, part of it anyway, is allowing them to have multiple recesses during the day. But what's interesting, when I talked to her, she was talking about how these short kind of brain breaks, so to speak, or brain boosts, so to speak, sometimes are just enough to get the kids riled up, and it doesn't give them a chance to kind of get the benefits of the movement and of the exercise. And so it really should be about an hour long so that they can kind of reap those benefits and then also have a time to kind of calm down a little bit. So do you see that also in your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we're on the other side of that spectrum where we provide a very long block of time. And when I went to Finland and I got to actually experience this within the Finnish classrooms, where they had 4 15-minute breaks, when I spoke to the teachers there, those breaks, it wasn't really recess per se. They were brain breaks. Like, so students, some of them went outside, some of them hung out and just read or did whatever. And there's a lot of benefit to those. It's like a quick nap, right? Sometimes a short nap is better than a very long one, right? I think the trick is, how do you find balance throughout the school day? Can you provide brain breaks and have a large period of time? The problem with that, as we all know, is that we have these insane federal and/or state mandates that don't allow us to do that, because they're saying that you need X amount of instructional time, and the state or the federal government won't look at recess and/or brain breaks as instructional time. That's really the problem, even though the research clearly shows that the benefits certainly outweigh, I think, outweigh anything that goes on in the classroom instructionally.
Right, because those times are also times for the kids to be able to process that information that they just learned, right? So not only does it kind of give them a chance to take a breath and kind of socialize with their friends, which is absolutely, probably more important than some of these concepts that we learn in class, but also gives them time to kind of process what they have learned and kind of really put that into long-term memory, right?
That's a great point. It does. It allows things to marinate and to actually, deep into their DNA, right? And so you have those opportunities that allow that to happen. And then, just as important, they're still figuring things out. They're negotiating at recess, right? They're taking turns. They're learning all these other types of skills and applying those skills, whether it's physically, emotionally, or socially, as they're processing what took place in the classroom as well. And so for us as either as a nation, a state, or even as a school district, for us to not see the real benefits for children and to continue to move along the way that we are, it really makes me scratch my head, because I just can't understand it at all. And at times I get in trouble because I'm a little too vocal about it, but we don't have time to keep showing people that we know it works, and then for people to say, well, I'm not going to do anything about it. To me, it's a grave injustice. And anytime I have the opportunity to articulate it, it allows me to at least share some of the things that we're trying to do in our school district and what best practices are around the world.
So how do we do that? How do we convince these stakeholders that this is a beneficial approach for learning for our children, for our students? I know one of the reasons why I moved to Saudi Arabia is because I wanted sort of a fresh start. The school I'm teaching in now is an IB school. It has a lot of really good features to it. My own personal children are in secondary school, 6th and 7th grade, and they do a lot of really, really cool things in the school. One of them being, they have breaks every so often throughout the day, just like you were saying, and they have a chance to really kind of think about sort of conceptual learning rather than just kind of learning facts and then regurgitating those facts, which I think is amazing. They do a great job here. And one of the things that I experienced at my old school was that it was getting to a point where the test was the most important thing, right? They were teaching to the test, scoring certain scores on the test, and getting this banner put up on the wall was the most important thing. And it became safety above all, right? So how do you convince those stakeholders that it's not about safety above all, it's not about the test scores, but it's really about the whole well-being of the child that's important?
That's it in a nutshell. That's the job of a superintendent who believes in the whole child approach, because you have to be very clear and articulate and deliberate. And the hardest thing to do is to change anybody's mind. It just is. It's almost impossible to do. And so when you talk about a school community that maybe is hyper-focused on results as the end-all and be-all, as a metric of a successful school district, the first thing I do is talk about other successful places, or what schools are doing, both in the United States and outside. Because I think for many of us, we only know things locally. We rarely know what's happening nationally, and certainly few of us know what's happening internationally. So my number one job is to educate people as to what the benefits are, as far as looking at it from a holistic approach. There are multiple spokes on the wheel when somebody is in school as far as outcomes. Test scores are one of them, but it's certainly not the end-all and be-all. If you can have high test scores, but you can have a student who is so crippled by anxiety and depression that who cares what the test scores are if they can't function in everyday life. And what's happening is we have kids, and I know you know this, we have kids who are competing to take 5, 6, 7 AP courses in 1 year, and because, it's weighted and they're bypassing lunch, and all that, make sure their average is 106.7 and they're in the top 10. And what does that actually mean? Like, what is the true benefit of it when universities rarely now are starting to look? First of all, they strip away the GPA, they bring it back down, unweighted, and in many cases now they're not totally caring about how many AP classes you're taking. They're caring about what you do outside of school. What do you do for yourself? Who are you as a person, as opposed to taking all these rigorous courses? Why aren't you taking electives? Why aren't you trying things that are new and different? Like that, which I'm very happy about. But for some reason or another, in very competitive communities, they're only seeing that metric. So again, my job is to say, when we have these kids for over 14,000 hours, right? We have them for 13 plus years. What do you want? What is the ultimate exit outcome for your child? Like, Is it just a high test score, or do you want your child to be civically engaged? Do you want them to understand humanities, to play an instrument, to appreciate sports, appreciate art? Because if that's what you want, because that's what society, I think, will benefit from, then it's not just about test scores. And that's a conversation. You know, when you have superintendents who come into a school district that try to turn it upside down and take a flamethrower to what's going, that never lasts. You know, they'll come in for 2 or 3 years, but it destroys the whole culture. I think if you're going to do it right in a school district or even in a state, for that matter, is that you need stable leadership, you need the right people on board, and you need to have a very deliberate and clear message. And that message is really what the Finns are doing very well, and other countries are doing well outside of the United States, which is the well-being of a child, the well-being of a student, and what does that look like, and how do you create the conditions, as Ken Robinson would say, within that school to enable that to happen. It's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of hard conversations, and you know, I've been fortunate so far to have our community understand the benefits of what well-being and why that's so important, much more important than any test score. On a larger scale, that's why Pazzi Salberg's so important, or you know, Andy Hargraves or Michael Fullen, and certainly Ken Robinson, because those messages, I think it resonates with a lot of people because it just makes sense.
So how important, when we're talking about stakeholders, how important are the parents in convincing, or you know, kind of sharing that message to the parents and having them understand that it's not necessarily only about those test scores? Because I mean, even on the elementary level, you see the pressure being put from the parents onto the students, sometimes not deliberately, but they have to get into a good middle school, you know?
Yeah.
And in order to get into a good middle school, you have to get these certain grades and you have to be a part of this club. And they're already building their resume in elementary school into a good middle school. It's crazy to me. And the pressure, again, not necessarily deliberately all the time from the parent, but they just want what's best for their kid. How do you convince those stakeholders that what's best for the kid isn't necessarily putting that stress on them, but more so allowing them to develop naturally?
Sure. You know, Michael Fullen talks about, you know, what are the drivers within the system, right? You know, to get to whatever outcome. And listen, if parents have been led to believe or fed a narrative that test scores are the end all and be all, and that's the purpose of education. By the way, that's a whole nother conversation, right? What is the purpose of education? I had that with my staff. And let me tell you right now, that was a very interesting conversation because over 600 teachers, probably 600 different definitions of what the purpose of education is, right?
But that's important too, to kind of narrow that down so everybody has a similar direction.
No doubt, and that's what we did. And to be honest with you, so when I talk to parents and I say, listen, what gets you up in the morning is that you want to make sure that your child has good test scores. I say, okay, listen, I'm not trying to change your mind. What I will say is, if you focus on the physical benefits of play and recess and the emotional needs and the social needs of your child, a byproduct of that, a natural byproduct, will be an inflation of academic scores. That's really what it comes down to. If you have those basic needs met, whether they're Maslow needs or those basic needs of social, emotional, and physical growth, you're going to have academic growth. It's impossible to have those three things firing on all cylinders and not to have academic growth. And they understand that. That actually makes sense to them. So it's all about balance.
But that in itself is a huge mind shift of having scores and education being the paramount, right? The paramount concern to it becoming a byproduct. Like, that's a really big mind shift, and I would imagine that some teachers would kind of resist that too.
They do, especially when those scores are attached to their evaluation, right? So think about, you know, their own evaluation and their own self-worth, because the state decides or the federal government decides that teachers need to be evaluated. You know, it's, you know, meshed with student test scores, which is just clinically insane, at least from my opinion.
And then incentive pay sometimes too.
It does, absolutely. So for me with the teachers, I have a whole different, and again, this is where I get in a little bit of trouble too, is I don't care about what their APPR scores are, meaning their annual professional performance review scores are based on what their test scores are for their kids. That's not what defines them for me. So I don't want that to be a worry for them. And I actually put it in writing and I put it in their folders saying, I don't care what that is. I want to take that off of them, that pressure off of them, and to trust, I want to say the model of the PEAS model, which is, again, it's physical, emotional, academic, and social growth, and to work on those things together, and let's see what happens. Now, I've been fortunate enough to be here for 5 years where I think I have that trust, but you have to earn that trust. And the teachers do have to take a leap of faith as well. And all I can say is, I think the more transparent a leader is in their core values and their core beliefs, and they talk the talk and they really, truly appreciate what teachers do and they understand, I think the more inclined to take that journey with you. Because the reality is, if they don't, then they're stuck in the same system they were before, which they've been hemming and hawing about, which they don't like either. So why not take a ride this way and let's see how it goes. And I have to say, I can't say it's 100%. That would be wrong of me to say, but it's definitely the super majority that I think are on board. And listen, like I said, it's universal best practice. It's happening where you are in the schools in Saudi Arabia. It's certainly happening in Finland. And I know it's happening in other countries around the world. Listen, Singapore is starting to move in this direction, for goodness sake. Singapore, which is either 1 or 2, depending on what year you're looking at as far as the PISA scores, if they're moving in that direction, like, why wouldn't you? And that's, I don't know, I still struggle with why aren't we doing that? But anyway.
So I want to take it back to something we kind of touched on, and I want to get your take on the purpose of education. So you said you had this conversation with your teachers. You had, all these different perspectives on what the purpose is. So what did you boil it down to? What is the purpose of education?
Yes. So for us, it's about making sure students have multiple opportunities to find out their talents and to maximize their potential. That's it in a nutshell. Our job is to make sure when kids leave here after X amount of years, they know what they're good at, they enjoy what they're doing, they know what they struggle with, and they learn how to compensate for those struggles, and then they find out where their ceiling is, what their potential is, and how good they can be at something. Because we have many kids who leave our systems who have no idea what they're good at, they have no idea what they like, and then they go to college, and then they drop out after their first or second year. Because we do national statistics, and we have all these students who go to college, more than half drop out. Student loan debt is through the roof. I actually love kids who don't go to college, who choose not to go to college, to go into the trades. They go, if they want to go into the military. Not everybody has to go to college. If they want to go and go to a trade school, and because there are so many jobs, and that's what they're passionate about, then we should value that very highly and make sure that they have those opportunities within the school day while we have them, so they can be successful. So it's about multiple opportunities for kids too. It's not about making sure all kids are going to college, because unfortunately, that's the way high schools are classified and ranked too, is the percentage of people who go to college. I don't care about that. All I care about is graduation rate. Certainly, I want that to be as close to 100% as possible. But I want kids to move in a direction that they're choosing to go in, and then to be successful.
So I guess that brings me to my next question. You mentioned being successful. What does success look like? Because it's not always necessarily monetary success that we're looking for, right? And in fact, that sometimes brings in an extra added level of stress that isn't good for your well-being. So what are we looking at when we're talking about success?
Well, success in what way? Success in the sense of when kids graduate from high school and then what they think is successful. Because for me, success is taking that inward journey and knowing what you want and moving in that direction and feeling like you're ready to move in that direction and having support. That to me is very successful, because I can't tell you how many kids, again, and I know we all know this, we know kids, and it was us when we were younger. We were forced to do X. We were forced to do Y. To me, success is when you do find a job or employment, it never feels like a job or an employment, because then, as you know, you're never working another day in your life. There's some national statistic where I saw it the other day, so don't quote me on this, but over 75% of people in life don't like what they do for a living. Could you imagine? I could not imagine for 30 or 40 years doing something you're in jail. You know, you're in this jail. If you're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, however many weeks a year doing something you don't like to do. Success is you ending up where you want to be in life and having the courage to do that and understanding your inward journey. Like that to me that's as good as it gets. And that's what we try to provide for our kids here. And that's what we should be doing everywhere.
So how difficult is that? And tell me maybe some of the strategies that you use when school is compulsory, right? You have to do it. You're forced to do it. You have no other choice.
Yep.
How do we make that something that the kids enjoy and want to do rather than being forced to do?
That's a great question. So I think most kids, I can't say all kids, but certainly most kids, I think, enjoy the elementary experience, again, because a lot of it is play-based. Grades aren't taken as seriously as they are once they hit the middle years and certainly the high school years. What I believe we need to do more of project-based types of opportunities for kids where kids get to work on real projects with people, learning all those different soft skills, interdisciplinary types of activities. So, you know, whether it's humanities, whether it's social studies, and fusing together, and or certainly math, science, technology. But I think the most important part is we have lots of kids who are really great with their hands. And for some reason or another, we don't allow them to explore all those opportunities at the middle level and certainly at the high school level as far as what they want to do for the rest of their lives. The states, and I can't speak for all states, but I know in New York State, you know, if a student wants to go in a vocational direction, they can't do that really until they're in 11th grade. And we lose a lot of kids by 11th grade. So when there's an absence of hope for kids to do what they want to do and what they're passionate about, we have to provide more opportunities at the lower levels for kids to try things that are new and different. We have all these requirements that I think we need to start looking at a different type of model, having more kids take exploratory courses as opposed to mandating some courses that we know that are just ridiculous. Like, why do kids have to take 3 or 4 years of math if they don't need it? Or same thing with social studies, or the same thing for all these other courses that they have to take. I know in Finland, right, so you talk about compulsory education, they don't start until 1st grade, right, and then they end at the end of 8th grade, and then 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th for the most part, right? So they go to a high school specifically if it's geared toward vocational or geared toward getting them ready for university. And types of high schools, we don't really have that in New York per se. We do in New York City, but not so much outside in the suburbs and in other areas of New York. We need to start looking at other opportunities for kids and look at possible virtual learning a little bit more. You know, kids who are very tech savvy, you know, giving them other opportunities and other types of spaces to learn. Because, you know, this traditional industrial model of sitting in rows for kids, that's not built for, actually, I'm going to for a lot of kids now. And it shouldn't be built for a lot of teachers right now to teach that way. Right. So I think there's a lot of things we can do, but I think the most important thing is we need to clearly define what the purpose of education is nationally. And right now, I think nationally, at least in the United States, we have lost our way because nationally, it's all about being the best. It's all about being number one. And if you're not number 1, 2, or 3, everybody else we really don't care about. And that has to change. That's why, you know, the Finnish model really resonates with me because there's no competition between schools. Like, they don't compete with each other, which is really amazing, right? Teachers don't compete against each other. The schools don't compete as far as scores against each other. Well, there are no scores really per se because there's only one exit test, as we know, in Finland. So we're not looking at 3 through 8 scores and who's keeping up with the Joneses. The Joneses are all the same. If you go to a school in Lapland in northern Finland or you go to a school in southern Helsinki, it should be relatively the same type of school as far as equity and parity. And until I think we address those differences within many of our schools as far as, you know, what's being offered and how it's being offered, you know, a lot of what we're talking about will be just in pockets then. And we can't do that, in my estimation.
So So there's a lot that kind of came to mind there. But one thing that you mentioned was you know, kids sitting in rows, and this idea of kind of sit and get, right? And I know you mentioned Sir Ken Robinson, and he's very critical on how we kill the creativity of our students in our schools, and that being part of it, right? There's one way to do things. There's a right way to do things. There's one answer. We're looking for this one answer. How do we change that? How do we encourage our teachers to give our kids a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more freedom to express themselves the way they can express themselves?
Sure. You know, it's funny. We had Ken Robinson out here about a month ago, which was an amazing experience.
Awesome.
I still can't even believe it. It's like I still think it's like a dream that I woke up from. Right. So it's the horse's mouth as far as divergent thinking. Right.
Yeah.
Is taking risks and teachers taking risks.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing that we can do as administrators is to allow teachers to try things that are new and different. I think if we look to control teachers, nothing will change. I think we have to give teachers a lot more autonomy to test drive things. And the best way to do that is to take, you know, if I'm a building principal and I have, let's say, 1st through 5th grade or kindergarten through 5th grade, you know, ask a teacher in each grade level to, you know, for the year to try 4 new things and don't worry about what the outcomes are. You know, if it fails, listen, we learn from it, but do not worry about it. Invite me in as an administrator to help support you. You know, my job is to serve and support, not to look at it from a deficit model as to what you're doing wrong. Like those little things over time, I think allows teachers to take risks, try things that are new and different, which then in turn allows students to try things that are new and different. One of the things we did was we have these divergent thinking labs. And all it is, like, you know how you go to art, music, you go to, you know, physical education. So for the most part, once a week, we'll have our teachers go to this safe classroom where all kids do is play games, whether it's with blocks, Legos, huge foam things where they can build things, deconstruct them, to figure things out on their own, to try things that are new and different, and to create those spaces that allow kids to do it, and to say it's not a waste of time. You know, we're not on page so-and-so in math because we're here. Don't worry about that. Allow kids to have these opportunities. And when you provide those opportunities and you allow teachers freely to try those spaces is when things start flowing. Because you can't force it down someone's throat. All you can do is provide those opportunities and trust teachers. And we have, that's the main thing is we as administrators and as a society, we don't trust teachers anymore. We demonize them. We think they're paid too much. We think that, you know, they don't do enough, and it's just the opposite. They're not paid enough, and they do, in many cases, they do too much, which is why they're so burnt out. So I think there are pockets of what we can do to change the narrative, but you have to let teachers fly. And I saw that over and over again when I was in Finland. There is no need for a superintendent in Finland. In fact, there really is very little need for a headmaster in some of the schools because the teachers really run the ship, and they make sure everybody else is doing what they're supposed to do, which is really amazing. And we need to bring the respect back to teaching that I think will allow kids to benefit from that.
You know, that's really interesting because again, kind of thinking about my time in the U.S. And feeling sort of that pressure, that sort of top-down pressure with these evaluation systems, where it seemed that the superintendents, you know, wanted certain types of teachers, certain types of system approach to the system, and then they communicated that to their regional superintendents, and they communicated that to the principal, which put the pressure on the teacher, which didn't allow the teacher to be creative or take those risks with their students. And then that in turn made the students a little bit more, you know, fearful of taking risks, right? So it's like this cycle that ultimately is detrimental to our students and their success and their ability to take risks. And I wonder how much of it, like you said before, like the competition doesn't exist in places like Finland, right? Teachers aren't pitted against each other or different schools or anything like that. So how much of a cultural shift do we need in the United States educational system so that these evaluation systems aren't, putting that sort of pressure that don't allow for the teachers to take risks and in turn don't allow the students to take risks?
Yeah, it's really true. I mean, it's the ultimate trickle down effect, right? It does in this case start from the top and it permeates and it infects or affects everybody. I mean, it really does. It's truly amazing, and I've seen it firsthand here. I think the best way to change either a mindset, whether it's nationally, either or statewide, or even locally, is I would love to see a state here in the United States take the lead, right? Because it's always easy, I think, easier to model something after what we're doing here. So what we're doing here in Pat Men, right? If you took the demographics of New York State and you shrunk it down, that's us right here. I believe what we're doing, we could scale up for the rest of the state. And I would love to see a state say, listen, this is the way we're going to go about our business. Here's the plan. Here's the way we're going to go about it for the next 3 years. You roll it out well in advance so everybody knows exactly what the expectations are. And then what you can do from a national standpoint is say, listen, New York is doing X. Let's have 5 more states try this over the next 3 years. And then over 10 years, hopefully, you have a majority of the nation moving in that direction. Because that's what happened with testing. Like Massachusetts was always like number one, right? When you looked at their scores nationwide, and of course, because we like to rank and sort states as far as how kids are doing, right. Massachusetts was always up there, right? As far as curriculum, as far as instruction, and as far as exit outcomes nationally. And you would find a lot of states trying to model what Massachusetts was doing. So why not do the same thing from a whole child approach? Let's have a state really take the reins and say, this is the way we should be going about our business K through 12 or even pre-K through 12, and then see if that's working and then have other states model it. Because I don't see it happening all in one fell swoop from a national perspective. It's just too big, too varied, and too many different types of philosophies. I think you would just, because look, even when you wanted, not you, but when the nation was looking to have national standards per se, right? There's a huge backlash with that. So I think if you do it incrementally, one step at a time, I think we can totally get there. But the story has to get out there, and that's part of the problem. Like you hear all these little successes in some school districts, like the one you mentioned in Texas, or in other places, or in other country, but we don't hear about states that have moved in this direction, and that's the next step. That's what I would like to see move forward in the next year or two.
Right, because I think one of the major criticisms, especially like of the Finnish system, is that they don't have the diverse population as the United States does, right? So they have different problems than we do. And that's something that I would always hear because I would present really all over the country when I was in the United States, physical education, presentations at different conferences and things like that. And one of the things that I heard consistently was, well, that's great that you can do those things in your school, but I can't do them in mine because we're different.
Yep.
So what are some of those like transcendent things that you can see from that don't necessarily require you to have a certain population of
Definitely.
kids in order to be successful?
Yeah, and that's really, again, it's a really great question. When you look at Finland, right, you can say, all right, it's a country, but it's compatible to the size of many of the states in the United States as far as overall population. And as people think it's not very diverse, but it's a lot more diverse than I think people are led to believe. Where I was in a few different places in Finland. In Joensuu, the unemployment rate was 14%. A very large immigrant population that immigrated to different parts of Joensuu. And so it was like one of the schools in New York City, one of the high schools I went to, looked very similar from either socioeconomic and or from a cultural standpoint. It was really amazing. Like if someone told me I was in Finland and I just woke up, I wouldn't have believed it. So I think there are universal best practices. It doesn't matter if you're in Finland, Ghana, United States, I don't care where you are, that are just fundamentally, doesn't matter where you are, you can implement right away and see success. And we've talked about a few of them. I think universally we should have at least 45 minutes to an hour of recess. That would be a game changer in so many different ways. Again, as the research not only suggests, but it certainly, I think it states very clearly, you will have more attendance, less behavioral concerns, and cognitive-wise, you've PET scans, right? You will see red than blue, and that's what you want. The second thing I would do, and that we do here, is we implement yoga and mindfulness. It's very, very important for us, K through 8. It's part of our curriculum. All students experience this throughout the year. And it's a way for kids to understand how to recalibrate. It's again, ways to learn how to breathe, take that journey inward to figure things out.
Is that something you encourage your teachers to do as well?
Absolutely. We have it for our teachers before school, after school, for administrators as well. It's really important we all get stressed, but to learn how to de-stress the best way we can, and the easiest way and the most effective way is to learn how to breathe, and to have a few different poses. And so we've implemented that over the years. And I'm going to tell you, it's another one of those things that it doesn't cost that much money. And it's all in the way that it's rolled out. And it's a universal best practice because, again, you want kids to stay in school, you want them to be engaged, and you want them to be in a good place mentally.
Yeah.
I think the third thing is multiple breaks throughout the day, just like the Finns do, especially at the secondary level. We have been led to believe that, kids have to have either an 8 or 9 period day, and the bell rings, we drool, we go to the next class. It doesn't have to be that way. So we have to, I think, fundamentally look at ways to change the system and embed brain breaks for students throughout the day. And then the last one I would recommend universally right off the bat is to really start holding vocational and the trades in a much higher regard and allowing students to fulfill their passions and make them not feel less than if that's the direction they choose to go in, and look at multiple pathways for kids to experience school. Some are more academic, some are more hands-on. Ultimately, in the end, though, they will all be educated, and we have to figure out a way to embrace and balance those scales. Right now, the pendulum is swung so far this way with just academics that we need to totally swing it back. And I think if we do those 4 things universally right off the bat, our nation would be in a much better place.
Listen, I think that is a great message to end this podcast with. I think those are absolutely doable, and like you said, they wouldn't cost much to do. I think that's great advice for any administrator out there, any stakeholder or parents who are listening to this to take that and encourage those types of changes in their school. I think what you're doing in your school district is amazing, and I hope that it does permeate throughout the state and then hopefully throughout the country, because I think, like I said, these are very practical ways to change the school system and better for our kids.
I appreciate you saying that.
So I really appreciate you coming on and spending some time with me and having this conversation. I think it's an important one. If somebody had a question, wanted to continue the conversation, what's the best way they could get a hold of you?
Yeah, probably via email. So the email would be mhynes@pmschools.org, or if they go on my Twitter handle, which is @Mike Hynes, Hynes 5, and they can ask me a question there. I'm pretty active on social media, as you know, so I can certainly answer questions that way too. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about this. I'm very passionate about it, and I know you are as well. So it was wonderful to meet you.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll definitely put that in the show notes, a way to contact you if they want to, and definitely to follow you on Twitter because you have a great social media feed. And I want to leave you with the last word. So if you would like to leave our listeners with a last word, a last idea, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I think my last would be to, I'm hoping that you believe that you can be a change agent in any way, whether you are a teacher assistant, an assistant principal or principal, whatever your core values are, and we should narrow them down to 3. And if you make all your decisions based on those core values, you can change a heck of a lot more than you think. And I hope you do, because we need more people in this world to start changing the way that we operate as an educational system, because our kids are counting on us. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.